and welcome everybody, as Natalia said, to the April History of Collecting seminar. I'm Suzanne Higgett, one of the curators at the Wallace Collection, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome back this evening's speaker, Dr. Ellinoor Bergvelt, even if it's not in person, as it was when Ellinoor gave one of our History of Collecting seminars in 2017. Dr. Ellinoor Bergvelt is a guest researcher at the University of Amsterdam and a research fellow at Dulwich Picture Gallery. She's a specialist in collections and museums and has worked in both the academic and curatorial milieu. Her doctoral thesis was on the 19th century history of the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and she has a long association with the University of Amsterdam, both as a student and as associate professor. Ellinoor coordinated the catalogue of Dutch and Flemish paintings in the Dulwich Picture Gallery in London with her late husband, Michiel Jonker. It was published in 2016, and only last month, the much enlarged online version of this catalogue was published in 2 parts in the series RKD Studies. And it's really quite a phenomenal achievement, and I highly recommend you're having a look and using it online. And this year, Ellinoor already has 2 other publications with Brill under her belt about the Taylors Foundation in Haarlem and its book and art room of 1779. In 2013 to 14, Ellinoor published an essay about the art collection of King Willem II in the catalogue of the exhibition Willem II and Anna Pavlovna, Royal Splendour at the Netherlands Court. So her lecture this evening results from her extensive study of the King's collection over a long period. I'm looking forward with great anticipation to this lecture, which will, I'm sure, include fascinating information about pictures from the Dutch King's collection that are today in the Wallace Collection. Ellinoor had been due to give this lecture last year, but the pandemic put paid to that plan. During and after Ellinoor's talk, please send in any questions you have through the Q&A. And it's my great pleasure now to invite Dr. Ellinoor Bergvelt to present her lecture, The Dutch King Willem II, 1792 to 1849, as collector and source of some important pictures in the Wallace Collection. Over to you, Ellinoor.
Thank you, Suzanne. Good afternoon, you all. Thank you, Suzanne, for the introduction and the invitation to speak today. The watercolor on the screen gives you an idea of the spectacular way in which the Dutch king, Willem II of Orange-Nassau, presented his collections. He built special galleries in the royal palace in The Hague. One gallery was for his paintings, that's this one, the Gothic Hall, and another for his old master drawings. The drawings are in the gallery behind the organ. Both galleries were open to the public, but only when the king was not in residence. The Gothic Hall was also used as a chapel on Sundays, for which the organ was used, and it also functioned as a ballroom whenever there was a ball. I studied this famous collection as part of my research into the history of the Rijksmuseum. The story of the king's collections became a kind of cause célèbre. It's commonly seen as a shame that the paintings and drawings were sold after the king's sudden death. 2 auctions were organized, and almost nothing of the king's collections was left in the Netherlands. Here you see 4 of the 8 pictures that were acquired at the first sale by the 4th Marquess of Hertford. He was one of the founders of the Wallace Collection. He bought 2 pictures by Van Eyck on the left and 2 by Rembrandt to the right. All 4 now hang in the great gallery of the Wallace Collection. By the way, the prices I mention here are mostly in Dutch guilders. The rule of thumb is that at that time, 1 English pound was about 12 Dutch guilders. Here you see another 4 of the 8 pictures that were acquired at the first sale. the Hobbema landscape, an Andrea del Sarto, a Rubens, and another Rembrandt, a portrait of the artist's son Titus. The Rubens is also in the Great Gallery. The other three are in smaller rooms. Here another two, the last two, that are in the Wallace collections. These are by Flemish artists, one by Eyck and another one by Portbu. They were offered at the king's first sale, but not sold. It was only after 7 years that one was purchased by the fourth Marquess, and even later one was bought by Sir Richard Wallace, another founder of the Wallace collection. You know now which 10 pictures ended up in the London collection. Here ends my introduction. This is how my talk will look like. First, I'll tell you something about the life of King Willem or William II. You will get so a piece of Dutch history, or rather European history, including the Napoleonic Wars. His father, also Willem, was the first of the family to become king. Before that, in the 18th century, they had been stadholders. We will then consider Willem and his collections. The story begins in Brussels. And then there was a stop because of the Belgian revolt. Later, Willem collected again in the Hague. We will then show how the pictures were presented in the newly built galleries. And the last part will be about the sales in the Hague. When Willem II was born, his grandfather was stadholder of the Dutch Republic of the 7 United Provinces. He was the 5th stadholder called Willem, so he was Willem V. This family clearly didn't have much imagination in the matter of names. When the French came in 1795, the family fled to England. That was the end of the Dutch Republic. Young Willem studied in Berlin at the military academy. He and his family felt quite at home in Berlin, since both his mother and his grandmother were Prussian princesses. Later he studied in Oxford at Christ Church College. After that he went to Spain and Portugal to fight against the French. He was a successful officer under the Duke of Wellington. Willem wrote several diaries about his travels. During his time at Oxford, he traveled in the south of England. We know that he visited large country houses, castles, and Stonehenge. His second journey was to northern England and Scotland, where he seems to have met Walter Scott. What you see here are the pages from a later diary with drawings of his stay in Lisbon and Spain. From his diaries, we get to know him as a romantic, with a longing for the Middle Ages. After the successful campaign in Spain and Portugal, Willem returned to London in 1813. In the same year, 1813, his parents thought it was wise for him to marry the English crown princess, Charlotte, and they were talking about an engagement. The family of Orange-Nassau were a princely family without a country at that time. They were still in exile and needed a substantial connection. The situation changed dramatically when Willem's father was invited to return to the Netherlands. You see him here arriving at Scheveningen, near The Hague, in November 1813. First, he was inaugurated as sovereign of the Northern Netherlands alone. A year later, in Brussels, in 1815, he became King Willem I of the United Netherlands. But that was after the defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo, after which the Congress of Vienna had decided that the Northern and Southern Netherlands should be combined into one kingdom. Here you see Willem I on his way to his inauguration in Brussels. He was king of the area that we now know as the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. The idea at the Vienna Congress was to enlarge the territory of the rather small Dutch Republic. The allies there in Vienna wanted to form a buffer against France, or rather against the possible new Napoleon. So now our Willem was crown prince. As such, his title was Prince of Orange. The return of the Orange-Nassau family in the Netherlands was even hailed in London, as you see in this print. In the background, to the left, we see the Prince of Orange, the future Willem I, landing on the beach of Scheveningen. But there was one who was not happy, and that was Princess Charlotte. Willem and Charlotte were indeed engaged. You see him here depicted as a Dutch toy. Now, he was no longer only a successful officer in a fine uniform from a noble family, but now he was a crown prince, as she was a crown princess herself. And that was not an advantage. One can say we had here two competing crowns. It meant that Willem would possibly become king and that she would then have to follow him to The Hague. Under no circumstances did she want to live in The Hague after her marriage, not even for a few weeks. She wanted to stay in London. She broke off the engagement in June 1814. So there was no repeat of the bond between the two countries as during the time of William and Mary, a century earlier. Another print featuring Willem as the Dutch toy, made during their engagement. Luckily, although he was humiliated, Willem had plenty to do. He had to go to war again against Napoleon, now in the southern Netherlands, again as an officer in the British Army and again under Wellington. You see him here depicted in the middle of the Battle of Quatre-Bras in Belgium. And here, 2 days later, during the Battle of Waterloo, Willem was very brave. He came to be known as the hero of Waterloo. He and his horse Vexy were injured, and you see him here below left being carried by soldiers. In the middle of the picture is the Duke of Wellington on his horse. This is, by the way, the largest picture in the Rijksmuseum, about 5.5 by 8 meters. It was not a commission. The painter Pieneman himself had taken the initiative. He traveled around England with this picture and earned money by exhibiting it for a fee. He had probably hoped to sell it to the Duke of Wellington, who is clearly the protagonist in this painting. But in the end, King Willem I bought the picture to commemorate the exploit of his son during the war. Napoleon later mentioned our Willem in his memoirs. He praised Willem's génie de la guerre, genius for war. Moreover, he said that without the Prince of Orange, the British army would have been destroyed before the battle. But that was Napoleon's way to diminish the role of the Duke of Wellington. These 3 images are all memories of Waterloo in the Royal Collection in The Hague. On the left, you see the letter Willem sent to his parents after the victory at Waterloo. Victoire, victoire, the letter starts. To the right, you can see the staff maps that Napoleon left behind on the battlefield that Willem had taken. And below is Willem's horse, Vexy, that also had been wounded at Waterloo and that was stuffed after his death some years later. After the victory over Napoleon and the restoration of the Ancien regime, Willem was a rather good match. He was not only the crown prince of the United Netherlands, but also a hero who had helped to defeat Napoleon. So an even more prestigious princess was found in St Petersburg. She was the youngest daughter of Tsar Paul I, Anna Paulowna. She was an imperial highness, not just a royal highness. And because Anna was the youngest daughter of the Tsar, the problem of the 2 competing crowns was not at play here, as with Princess Charlotte. You see here the rather large family of Tsar Paul. 2 of Anna's brothers also became Tsars, Alexander and Nicholas. Alexander is on the left, and the little Nicholas leans against his mother. Little Anna, in her green dress, leans against her father. She was 5 years old. Anna could also have married an Austrian prince or even the French crown prince, but in either case she would have had to become a Roman Catholic. In the Netherlands, however, she was allowed to keep her Russian Orthodox faith. Several Russian Orthodox chapels were built in the Dutch palaces. Anna was used to a very luxurious lifestyle in St. Petersburg. She came to The Hague with money, furniture and jewelry from her family and her Russian baker. People at the court in The Hague were amazed at her habit of changing clothes several times a day and at her deep baths. It was an arranged marriage, but Willem and Anna were quite fond of each other. Here are bracelets with their names in French, Guillaume and Anne. They had 4 children, as you can see in the picture below left. But there were problems. There was a fire in the palace in Brussels in 1820 and then a theft. The fire destroyed Anna's existing jewels, and new ones were sent from St Petersburg immediately. But the fire also burned the paintings that Willem had just begun to collect. It seems that Willem started to collect in the year of their marriage. He had just seen the extensive art collections of the Russian Tsar in the palaces in St. Petersburg, and that may have inspired him. Another inspiration was possibly Willem's grandfather. He had also built an art gallery in The Hague for his pictures. That was in the 1770s, and a much more modest affair. But since our Willem left The Hague when he was only 2 years old, he probably did not have any recollection of his grandfather's gallery before he returned to The Hague. The opening of princely collections to the public was a trend in Europe. In the second half of the 18th century, princes everywhere in the German lands were opening their collections and building museums for them, like here in Kassel. This was an expression of enlightenment. Sovereigns collected artifacts, scientific objects, and objects of natural history. They opened their collections for their subjects to study, ultimately benefiting the country's economy. The Dutch stadtholder was thus behaving like a German prince. We must not forget that he was married to a princess from Berlin. This stadtholder was trying to get his family to be a royal family. The stadtholder's gallery existed only for some 20 years. It was reconstructed in the 1970s. In Napoleon's times, the victorious French collected spoils from all over Europe, from Rome, Kassel, Vienna, Berlin, and also from The Hague. And this is what the Louvre looked like in 1810. You see the room with the Laocoon group that the French had taken from Rome. The Louvre was around 1800 home to the largest and most beautiful collection of art ever assembled, until the Battle of Waterloo. The French had taken the finest of the stadtholder's pictures. The most famous was the Bull by Paulus Potter. It celebrated triumphs also in the Louvre. Paulus Potter was called there the Raphael of the North. What the French appreciated even more than the pictures were the internationally very famous natural history collections of the stadtholder. They took objects and living and dead animals to Paris. Those objects and animals did not return to the Netherlands. The stadtholder's elephants, Hans and Parky, were brought to Paris and eventually died there. After Waterloo, when Napoleon was finally defeated, the victors tried to get their art and other collections back from Paris. That was not always completely successful. Only part of the stadtholder's pictures returned from Paris. Back in The Hague, they formed the core of the royal cabinet of paintings, later called the Mauritshuis, after the building in which it was housed. Here you see Willem's father, Willem I. He was king of the United Netherlands. Although Willem tried to unify North and South in all other areas, he did not do so in the arts. He did not found one national art museum for North and South together. During his reign, there were 2 national art museums in the north, one in Amsterdam above, and one in The Hague on the right below. In the south, there were museums in Antwerp and Brussels, but they were municipal, not national. The king was not an art lover himself. He did not have an art collection, but he sometimes bought works of art for the queen or his children as birthday presents. He was, however, buying pictures for the 2 national museums. but many more for the Mauritshuis, as you can see. He had to approve every purchase for which the museum's directors had to submit proposals. The museums did not have their own budget. The pictures were paid for from the budget of the Ministry of the Interior. In general, an average price of 1,000 guilders was paid for the old masters. Often the ministry's money was exhausted. The Dutch economy was still going badly. When the ministry's money ran out, the king stepped in sometimes, certainly not always, and paid in that case what was missing from his generous salary. He had a generous salary because he had to be compensated for the loss of, for example, the stadtholder's art collections. In this case, the king had partly paid for the picture by Adriaan van der Velde. The rest was paid for from the budget of the Ministry of the Interior, as was the Vermeer. We can only be amazed at the prices these two paintings cost, and at the fact that the director of the Mauritshuis did not want the Vermeer. He thought it was not suitable. He preferred Van der Velde's hut. This is the only case when the Rijksmuseum was assigned the more expensive painting by the king. This was another exception. It was a very expensive picture for which neither the ministry nor the king paid the most. Rembrandt's anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp was mainly paid for from the proceeds of the sale of the Rijksmuseum, so-called double pictures. The director of the Rijksmuseum was not amused when he found out later, much later, what had happened. It was clear that the Mauritshuis was the king's favorite. That lasted until the Belgian revolt of 1830. In that year, all spending stopped for all museums. Almost nothing was bought for the museums until about 1870. There was a 40-year period of national indifference, as we call it. Oh. Yeah. Finally, Willem's collection. After the fire in the Brussels Palace in 1820, Willem had to start again. He began by buying 23 tableaux Gothic from the art dealer Nieuwenhuis. Gothic pictures were Flemish primitives, pictures made by the 15th century painters as Jan van Eyck or Simon Marmion. He made the pictures on the right, then considered to be made by Hans Memling. The Prince of Orange also bought Peruginos. They are now in the Louvre in Pittsburgh. He spent a lot of money. While his father was rather frugal, in the case of the museums, the Crown Prince bought pictures at an average price of 6,000 guilders apiece. For the museums, the average price was 1,000 guilders, 1/6. Willem also acquired some classical Dutch 17th century pictures by Jan Steen and Jacob van Ruisdael. They ended up in Luxembourg and Brussels. But the emphasis in Willem's first collection in Brussels was on tableaux Gothic, or Flemish primitives. You see here a Rogier van de Weyden and another Jan van Eyck. What I have showed you just now are all pictures that he collected before 1830, when as Crown Prince he was living in Brussels. Willem's preference for pictures made in the southern Netherlands can be related to the patriotic enthusiasm in the various Flemish cities. For instance, there was a grand celebration in Bruges to commemorate the invention of oil paint by Jan van Eyck 400 years earlier. We do not know how the paintings hung in the palace in Brussels. There are no depictions. What we do have, however, is a catalogue made by Nieuwenhuis, the art dealer who was Willem's main supplier. Willem had commissioned him to make a catalogue, and Nieuwenhuis was to describe them in the order in which they hung in the palace when Willem left Brussels. That is rather strange, since Willem had no access to the palace, nor to his pictures. The Netherlands had still not recognized Belgians' independence. From this catalogue, we also know that 6 of the 10 Wallace Collection pictures were already hanging in rooms in the palace in Brussels. I'll show you. The Peter Purbus was in the first room, the Salon de Service, with the Jan van Eyck pictures, and copies of various panels of the large altarpiece of Jan van Eyck in Ghent. In the next room was the Andrea del Sarto, and in the audience hall was the Rubens of Christ charged to Peter. The two life-size Van Eyck pictures were hanging in the dining room, with two other life-size paintings by Velázquez. The artist here is González Cook. Though his name sounds Spanish, he was Flemish. This painting was in the Salon Gris of the ladies in waiting of Anna Paulowna. Here is she herself. This is the portrait she commissioned from the painter Cornelis Kruseman. She handed it to Willem rolled up when he went to war again in 1830, this time against the rebellious Belgians. This was her way of showing her support for her brave husband. The regime of Willem I was quite unjust to the Belgians in the field of religion and language. So in August 1830, the Belgians revolted against the Dutch rule. Immediately, the Dutch army moved to the south. A year later, the Dutch army went into battle again with great enthusiasm. The army was led by Willem, Prince of Orange, and his brother Frederick. The campaign lasted 10 days. In principle, they had defeated the Belgians, but then the French came to the Belgians' rescue. Obviously, the French did not want a buffer in the north against a possible new Napoleon, and unfortunately, the Allies had lost their interest in a strong Netherlands. Thus, Belgium was created. Here we see the Prince of Orange acting very brave, or you would call it reckless. At some stage, he even tried to become King of Belgium. It took 9 years before the Netherlands recognized the independence of Belgium. Shortly after the treaty, Willem I abdicated and Willem II became king in 1840. Under the treaty, the paintings from the Brussels palace were sent to The Hague. Here Willem is inaugurated in November 1840 in the new church in Amsterdam. He did everything differently from his father. Willem I had been frugal and sensible with money. Willem II was certainly not sensible with money. His father bought paintings for both national museums, if rather sparingly. On the day when he became king, Willem II forbade any purchase for the museums. However, he was spending money on a royal scale for his private art collection and for jewelry. And because he never paid on time, he had to pay a lot of interest. I think he realized a few years before he became king that he would stay in the Netherlands and that Belgium and his Brussels palace was really lost. So then he started to think about his collection again, and he had the catalogue made by Nieuwenhuis of the paintings that were in Belgium. And that 3 years after the catalogue was published, were sent to The Hague in 1840. A year after the catalogue was published, he ambitiously purchased from the London art dealer Samuel Woodburn a very important collection of old master drawings. That collection had been assembled by the famous English painter Sir Thomas Lawrence. It seems that Willem was preparing to form a royal collection. He was helped by the legacy of his recently deceased mother. The drawing by Raphael was bought by the Louvre. It was the most expensive drawing in the sale, and the Michelangelo drawing was bought back by Woodburn. These Rubens drawings, both studies for the Garden of Love in the Prado, were also part of the Lawrence drawings, which he bought from Woodburn. These belong to the few that were saved for the Netherlands. These were bought by the Amsterdam collector Fodor. Here you see 2 other drawings from Woodburn. The Raphael drawing was acquired by the Frankfurt Museum, and the other one by Leonardo was also bought back by Woodburn and ended up in the British Museum. The king's drawings were noticed, for instance, by Warnham, Ralph Warnham, who later became keeper of the National Gallery. He noted, visited the Hague, excellent picture gallery belonging to the king, but sorry to see that Lawrence's fine collection of drawings by the old masters had been allowed to leave the country. Luckily for Britain, many of the drawings returned. In the year of his inauguration, Willem really became serious about his royal collection and royal gallery. A month before he became king, he laid the first stone of the Gothic Hall. It is thought that it has been modelled on the hall of Christ Church College in Oxford, where he had been a student 30 years earlier. A marble hall was also built for the pictures. Here things went wrong. The king was his own architect and did not listen to the builder. When the contractor said he should use lead or zinc for the roofing, Willem didn't listen. He liked glazed tiles better, and a garden was laid out on top of it. As a result, the marble hall was demolished 5 years after the death of the king. But first, the Gothic Hall was built. That to be filled, which indeed happened in the next 4 years, as you can see from these two images. The king had started with buying the 12 portraits of apostles by the Spanish painter Ribera. They were hung between the windows. Because of the empty walls, Willem II attempted to get back the collection of his grandfather. Those pictures had been nationalized, so in the end they were beyond his reach. He also wanted the paintings in the two museums that had been paid for by his father. At the instigation of the minister, the museum directors said that it was too complicated to find out which picture had been paid for by the previous king. Eventually, Willem II gave up. He had to buy the pictures himself, which in the end, combined with the building of palaces, caused his financial ruin. But it is clear that in The Hague he collected pictures of a different type from the ones he had collected in Brussels. They were large, and they were more like the pictures collected by other European royals since the previous century. This was a bit old-fashioned. For a great deal of money, he bought a large Murillo in a spectacular frame and a large Rubens of the tribute money. We can see them both on the right wall of the Gothic Hall. Here we see below one of the studies the artist Wijnands made when he was preparing his watercolors of the Gothic Hall and the Marble Hall. Because of this study, we know that the picture below, left of Rubens of the tribute money and to the right of one of the Velázquez portraits, was Rembrandt's Titus. That portrait was also a recent acquisition, although not so large and not so expensive as the Murillo and the Rubens. The other two Rembrandts now in the Wallace collection were also acquired around that time. They were rather large and were again rather expensive. On the left wall, we also can see one of the Peruginos from the older collection. Here we see again one of the studies the artist Wijnands made when he was preparing his watercolors. Especially this drawing seems somewhat redundant, as in the final watercolor we see none of these paintings, we only see their frames. But for the art historian, such a drawing is a gold mine. We see one of the Van Dijks, now in Wallace collection, and also a Sebastiano del Piombo, a recent acquisition. This was the most expensive painting that Willem ever bought. Now it is in St Petersburg. Wijnands also made a view of the Gothic Hall, looking in the other direction. Here we see the king in his uniform, the queen probably busy copying, and also the keeper concierge Victor Amadeo Trosserello. In the middle is the entrance to the marble hall. To the left and right of it are two large paintings by Dirk Bouts. They are among the very few Flemish primitives in the Gothic Hall. Behind one of the candelabras in front of the right wall is the other Van Dyck portrait now in the Wallace Collection. This portrait of the king in his study features Trosserello again in the background. It was recently acquired by the Royal Collections. It came from the family of Trosserello. Clearly, it was a present from the king. In the study, we see the Rubens and the Titus again that we saw hanging in the Gothic Hall a year earlier. Had there been a rehang, or could Trosserello have chosen the paintings he wanted to appear in his gift? In any case, we see the London Titus here again. Finally, here is a depiction of the last of the paintings now in the Wallace Collection. It is the Gonzales scope that we saw hanging in the Brussels Palace. However, it's not in the museum rooms in The Hague, but in the White Room, in the more private parts of the Royal Palace. It was probably a favorite of the Queen, since in Brussels it was hanging in her Salon Gris. This drawing by Van Hove was probably made as a memory of The Hague for Princess Sophie, who lived in Weimar. Here, the portrait of Willem II. Here he is shown as an art collector. To the left, we see his Raphael, round Raphael, now considered to be by Andrea del Brescianino, and to the right, one of his art galleries. Would this portrait have been made in Brussels, then he would undoubtedly have been depicted with a Jan van Eyck picture. This is Willem II in his Hague period of collecting. This picture was made in 1848. In that year, he almost went bankrupt. He had to borrow 1 million guilders from his brother-in-law, the Russian Tsar Nicholas I. And rather stupidly, he gave his art collection as collateral. He had not told anyone in The Hague about the loan. So when he suddenly died a year later, his heirs panicked. This is an image of how the Gothic Hall looked during the viewing days of 1850. We do not know who made this print, but the author clearly criticized the children of the king, who had his beautiful collection auctioned or demolished, as it says. Prince Frederick, the brother of Willem II, gave the Tsar 1 million guilders, the collateral for the loan, to get the collection back. They hoped to get more money if they put the collection up for auction. A committee was set up to investigate Willem's finances. Ironically, after 20 years, they found out that there had been enough money. There had been no need to sell the paintings and drawings, but they did not know that in 1849. The auction was held. The auction was held in August, though the auctioneers had said that was not wise, as now midsummer was not the season for art auctions in the Netherlands or in London. As the result of the auction was far less than the million the heirs had hoped. The timing was probably why the London National Gallery ignored the sale, where there was much to appeal to them. We could call this a missed opportunity for the National Gallery. We've noted that Warnham had seen the drawings from the Lawrence collection in The Hague, but he had also his eye on the paintings of Dirk Bouts. But he did not become keeper of the National Gallery until 1855. You might have thought that someone from the National Gallery, the keeper or one of the trustees, would have heard about the Royal Collection in The Hague, or even had gone to see it on the viewing days, but nothing happened. In general, very little happened at the National Gallery in those years. The trustees did nothing, or almost nothing. They only met 3 times a year. It was not without reason that an inquiry was held in Parliament. After the publication of the inquiry's very voluminous report with recommendations for improvements, the National Gallery was thoroughly reorganized. There came a yearly budget, a rather generous one. After this year, the National Gallery began to flourish, with many acquisitions mainly from Italy. Professional staff were appointed. Charles Eastlake became director and Warnham keeper. Warnham and Eastlake knew what had been in the King's collection, but they were not in power when the auctions took place in The Hague. But there were quite a few leftovers, paintings that had been bought in, for which they could have done their best. But in this case, they didn't. The pictures by Dirk Bouts were leftovers. They had been bought in by the family in 1850 and again at a second sale a year later. After 5 years, the art dealer Nieuwenhuis had acquired them and sold them finally to the Belgian government. Perhaps Eastlake was too focused on Italy to bother about the pictures in The Hague. In the Netherlands, they did not try very hard either. The museum directors realized that nothing had been bought for their museums for 20 years, since the Belgian revolt. In the Dutch parliament, the proposal was discussed to set up a fund to buy the King's collection or parts of it. This was massively defeated by 50 votes to 8. The Dutch government and the Dutch parliament could not be accused of love of art. However, it could have been worse. It could have been worse if Willem had managed to get his grandfather's paintings back from the Mauritshuis, or if the directors had figured out what the previous king had contributed to the purchases for their museums. In that case, the pictures on the screen and many others would also have been auctioned and gone abroad. We must count our blessings. Here you see the buyers who had not been held back by the month of August and who nevertheless came to the viewing days in The Hague. They were the Louvre, the museum in Berlin, the Städelsches Institut in Frankfurt, and then the two big buyers at the auction, the Tsar and Samuel Mawson, who bid for the fourth Marquess of Hertford. This is what the Louvre purchased. And this went to Berlin. This museum clearly had a preference for Gothic pictures. We can relate this to the ideal of a great Germany in the 19th century, that later in the century led to Rembrandt being seen as a German. The Stadel is a relatively small museum in Frankfurt with not much money. They were outbid by Mawson in the case of the Van Dijks, in the case of the Perugino by the Louvre, and in case of the large Van Eyck by the Tsar. But in any case, they did better than the National Gallery and they did better than the two Dutch museums. We see as examples here their Raphael drawing and the Van Eyck picture. They bought many more artworks. The Tsar was the largest buyer. He wanted to increase his own collection, and he undoubtedly also bought paintings to support his sister and her children financially. Here the Sebastiano del Piombo again and the Van der Helst that hung in the marble hall. The Tsar also bought the most expensive pieces, as the so-called Leonardo. The Van Eyck was sold to America by the Soviets in the 1930s. And of course, the fourth Marquess of Hertford, whose agent Samuel Mawson outbid not only the Stadel, but also the Tsar in the case of the Van Dyck pictures. Both the Tsar and the Städelsches Institut had wanted to have the Van Dyck portraits. I show you his other acquisitions again. Here again is Hobbema and the Rubens, and the Sarto and the Rembrandt, and here the González Coke and the Peter Pourpu. And I would like to end with this picture again, Willem II as art collector, the protagonist of this lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ellinoor, for that incredibly packed, fascinating, like a whistle-stop tour, a wonderful array of paintings from so many different periods, and also really interesting to see the taste for the early pictures as well, and also fascinating to me to see the Hertford's purchases in context, in this wider context, and to realise just how incredibly active he was in this, you know, involved with the purchases from this sale. Just what an incredibly big player he was, really. So that was fascinating. I haven't yet turned on chat, and we don't have any questions yet. Oh yes, we do. Yes. Do we know if Mawson bid for anything else at the sale but was outbid? So
that I don't know. No, I don't know. But I only know that they were talking about the second sale where was another Rubens that he didn't thought was interesting enough. So that I do know, but I do not know if he had the wish list or something like that. But what I did not say, it would deserve a separate investigation how these pictures fit into the collection of the fourth Marquess of Hertford and in the collection of the Sir Richard Wallace, but I did not have time for that.
No. Did you look at the Hertford Mawson letters that were published by John Ingerman?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There were two letters in which the sales were mentioned, and then the first letter is about the Marquess who says that he didn't like Mawson having sent a letter to the Times with the amount of money he had spent. He did not want the people to know that.
I remember that letter, but not about that sale. So I think if you knew, as I thought you would, the Hertford Mawson letters, I can't think of a way that there would be any other way of finding out the answer to that question, really, as to whether he had been an underbidder for anything. And we've got yes, appreciation here from Belinda Ross saying, what a brilliant whistle-stop tour of 19th century art in the Netherlands. Fantastic history. And yes, Valerie Bajou has asked, why did the king prefer old masters? Is it evidence for a royal collection not to collect contemporary art?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so I think
yes, I showed that, and it was on the screen next to the poster for the sale. It's he also collected contemporary art, but I left that out, as I left out all his animals and gardens and plants, and he had many more collections, but I concentrated on the old master paintings and drawings. But he indeed had also a very important collection of contemporary paintings.
And can you just give a general idea of the breadth of that collection of contemporary paintings, or the nationalities of the
yes, and there Belgian, Dutch and Flemish, but also French. But I do not know, for instance, whether they had any English. No, I do not know that. Sorry, but I can find it out. If somebody is interested, I can look it up.
Thank you. So would you say the old masters, the old master paintings were his, he was most passionate or interested in that side of his collecting, or not especially?
I think so, because the Gothic Hall is the most prestigious room with with I assume the most prestigious works of art, and where the contemporary paintings were, according to me, hanging in their own rooms, in the private, and in the marble hall there were some contemporary paintings, large ones about the Dutch history.
Thank you. Okay, so Rosemary Hill has written, thank you for a fascinating talk and an insight into the fate of artworks swept across Europe by political upheavals. Did any of the collection find its way back to Christchurch?
That I do not know. I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
And do you have, I've got a question, do you have any idea of how influential his wife may have been, whether she had a bearing on the formation of the
I expected that question, but I had myself that question when I started my research in the archives of the royal collections, and I looked for any sign of her, but I couldn't find it. There are, for instance, notes, receipts for the work that was done by the carpenter for the work for the king, who was busy with Trossorello, but nowhere the queen is mentioned. And the only thing we have of her is her being busy in the Gothic Hall, probably copying. And we know that she made a copy after a Murillo, but that was in St Petersburg already. And we know that she embroidered chairs, but that's all we know. But I do not think, I looked for it in the archives and I could not find it. But that does not mean that she didn't have any influence, but I couldn't find any proof.
Yes, it's interesting that it was the clocks that she, that's now at the Wallace, that she had in the more private rooms, isn't it? Because it's a family portrait. So.
Yes, and she also had the Dutch, the stains and the landscapes and so were in her room, next to the portraits of her brothers.
Yes,
I think she liked them. Yeah.
Yes, that's really interesting. And if you have any questions, do please keep sending them into the chat. We've got another question here from Susan Ezra saying, very interesting, thank you. You spoke of the king collecting jewellery. Was this contemporary or old jewellery? Did the Queen have anything to do with these acquisitions?
Oh yes, of course. And I studied both the notes and the receipts of the King Willem I and the II. And jewelry is all over the place. You always see receipts for jewelry, and this was all contemporary. And you see the jewelers sending jewels to the king or the queen, and you see that the one king and the next king, they are buying jewelry galore. A lot of jewelry is bought, but it's always new.
Yeah, so always for use, presumably.
Yes. Yes, for use. Yes.
And did they buy any from Parisian jewelers? Because there were some.
I think so. Yes, yeah. They were sent from London, from Paris. I can look that up, but that is a long time ago that I saw those things. But yeah, they came in from all over Europe.
Fascinating. And Lucy Whitaker has asked, what were the main influences on Wilhelm's hang of the paintings? Did Victor Amadeo Trossorello have a part in the choice and the display?
That of course, we do not know, but I think that he had seen a lot of halls in English houses and castles, and also in German and in Russian. I think the king wanted to do, knew exactly what he wanted for his gallery and for his presentation. And Rosarello helped him, but I don't think that he was an advisor.
Thank you. And then Howard Coots is asking, where is at the time, the painting where now is the painting that at the time was thought to be by Raphael?
Oh, we do not know. Present whereabouts unknown. I'm sorry.
And then he's also asked, did you say the Gothic Hall was demolished immediately?
No. The Gothic Hall is still there. Oh. The Marble Hall was demolished because that had a roof with glazed tiles, but the Gothic Hall still is there, but it's completely stripped. You cannot recognize it. I've been there, but it is whitewashed, and it is in use as a meeting room in Parliament. That is used for meetings.
Thank you.
But so the Gothic Hall is still there.
Thank you. There's an interesting question here from Lucy Holloway. If you, Ellinoor, could grab one of the paintings from the sale and take it back to the Netherlands tomorrow, which one would you pick and why?
Oh dear. Oh, that is a difficult question. Yeah. I would have liked the Boutses, but they are in Brussels, so near enough. And I think the Boutses I would have liked.
And why? She's also asked why. Why would you choose those?
Why? Yes. Because we do not have that much early Flemish primitives in the north here. Yeah, that would have been, and they are large and an interesting subject. They were to warn the future king of a present king to behave good, to behave well. And so that it's, I think I like the Boutses the best.
Thank you, that's great. And yes, Susan Ezra, given the connection to the Russian royal family, did he buy from Fabergé?
That I have not seen. I don't think so. But I think, no, I don't think. But Fabergé, was it functioning then already? It is later, isn't it?
I personally,
I thought
later, but can't check it immediately.
I do not know. I did not come across any Fabergé offer, but I think they are later.
I think that's the case. And Paul Spencer Longhurst is asking, is there documentation linking the picture gallery with Christchurch Hall, or is the evidence just visual?
I think just visual. No, I don't think there is found any proof of that he, but he has studied there, so he must have known it. So, and it's rather obvious that he had looked at it. But I do not know of any better proof than our eyes.
Thank you. And there's a related comment here, really, I think, rather than a question, from Belinda Ross, who says, it's interesting that he modelled the Gothic Hall on Christchurch, where he studied civil law. Gray's, Lincoln's and Inner Temple Inns of Court modelled their new halls on Oxford medieval halls, almost exact replica of the Baroque hall. So I think I'm not quite sure where that's going, but it seems like Christchurch was very influential, perhaps, as a model.
He was not allowed to study, really. He followed courses because he was not an Anglican, and he was not allowed to do the real study there. But he yeah, they gave him a diploma anyhow.
Yes, Lucy Holloway is asking, where are the Bouchers? She's not sure she spelt it correctly, but where are they now, the paintings?
Oh, in Brussels, in the museum in Brussels.
Right. Yes, thank you. And then I have, I've got a question about the drawings you showed of the hangs that included some of the Wallace Collection paintings, the interiors. I just wondered if you could say perhaps a little bit more about the context in which the drawings were made.
Yeah, it is a bit not completely clear because the Wijnands made drawings probably commissioned by the king, but the drawings are not in his possession, nor are the preparatory drawings. So it's not quite clear, but yeah, the most likely that the king would have given him that commission. But perhaps it went wrong when the king died. That is possible. That Wijnand was still busy with them, but the first one is dated 1846 and the other one is dated 1850. So perhaps it went wrong when the king died and everything went wrong with the finances. And but the other ones, yeah, the Van Hove drawing of the White Room, that I said that was probably a present for Princess Sophie as a memory of because that drawing is in Weimar. It's also possible that she bought it at the sale, but and what were the other? Yeah, I have the idea that the king was trying to promote his collection, at least in the way of publications about it. In the 40s, there are several publications made by several authors and a very large catalog is published. It's so large you have to stand to read it. And that I think that was a commission. So probably all those things were related to ideas of the king about the promotion and of his collection and gallery.
Oh, that's really, really fascinating. Thank you. And so the next comment, yes, Lucy Holloway says she grew up there, so I think she's talking about the Hague. I'm going right back when I'm allowed. Now to the Wallace. If we went to see one painting at the Wallace, what should it be? So
the Titus. I think I like the Titus the best.
Thank you. Right. Okay, next one. Alison Sharp, thank you, a fascinating talk. You mentioned that public visitors had access to the Gothic and marble halls only when the king was not in residence. What evidence is there for how he used these rooms? Did they have any ceremonial function?
Yes, I told that it was used as a chapel on Sundays. So there was a preacher on Sundays, and the organ was also used for the balls when there was a ballroom. It was also used as a ballroom. So it was a museum annex, ballroom annex chapel.
Thank you.
And we do know that artists visited the collections, but we do not know how many visitors there came. But we do know that people like foreigners were allowed access to collections and museums anywhere.
Do we know if they were? I
do not know how many people came.
Thank you. I wondered if they were allowed to copy if they wanted to, whether we know that.
Yes. The artists were allowed to copy. Yeah, yes.
Thank you. And then Paul Spencer Longhurst asked, outside your immediate subject, but have you come across links with the exiled Jacques-Louis David and his Belgian students?
No, but I really did not look at the contemporary paintings because David was living in Brussels at the same time. I now realize that. No, I haven't come across that, but probably somebody would have found that by now. There's probably not. Yeah.
And Rosemary Hill asks, what colour were the walls in the Gothic Hall? Were they stone or painted stone colour?
Oh dear, that's a difficult question. Oh, I do not know that. But we can go back. How do we do that? Yeah. Let's have a look at the. Now, come here. You do not see the walls. It's all pictures. And I think it's white washed above between the windows. You cannot see walls. No, I do not know that. Sorry.
Thank you. Well, thank you for
and
going
the
back.
other one, and this one. There is a pattern. When you look behind these paintings, there is a kind of pattern below the white of the roof. Perhaps we can find out, but I do not know that by now.
Thank you. Yes, so then Rosemary's just written in, yes, there seem to be hangings on the lower parts of the walls.
It's quite possible that it is our hangings.
Yes. And then Belinda Ross has commented that that Willem seems to have been an early and enthusiastic adopter of the Gothic revival movement like Albert, and also said walls were usually panelled.
Yes.
So, yes, very interesting to see and find out more about the actual background to the pictures.
Yes.
So I think
I read an article about the architecture of Willem, and the author said that we must look to German examples, and because there are a lot of German princes who were building in Neo-Gothic at the time. But I thought that's not my subject today. I didn't look at it further.
It's very interesting, of course, all these influences. Fascinating subject. Another question has just popped up from Alexander Sevastos. Did Woodburn merely act as his dealer, or was he more actively involved in forming the collection of Willem? If not, were there other people involved in building the collection?
Good question. No, I do not think. Now, you can say that Nieuwenhuis, who was the main supplier in Brussels, was a kind of advisor. I think he bought then the best pictures, but I don't think that Woodburn was. But he bought the whole collection at one time, so that's a bit an easy way to collect, I would say. And later, Nieuwenhuis' influence is less in the Hague, I mean, but no, but I don't think that Woodburn was an influence. I think Willem listened to himself mainly when we hear about the building.
And there are some comments coming in here from Sander Walterink saying The Gothic wall, I think hall, the Gothic hall today still has its original wooden panelling in Gothic style. They formed the back wall to most of the paintings.
But you don't see in the depictions, you do not see any wall. Because the pictures are there. Yeah. Yes.
Yes. And I think that brings us to the end of the questions. So thank you very much. Generated some very interesting questions, and given lots more to think about, actually, but various aspects of your presentation, really thought-provoking and fantastic. So our programme for the History of Collecting seminars for 2021 is, of course, now has been available for some time now. And if you're not on our mailing list for the History of Collecting and you'd like to join it, please contact us at and I think we may have a slide there, Ellinoor. The last
yes
gives us the.
I'm trying to find it.
Thank you. But anyway,
yes,
yes,
here it is.
And it gives you at the bottom there. You can see that the email address, if you'd like to join the mailing list, is collection@wallacecollection.org. Due to the uncertainty about travel restrictions, which may continue for the remainder of the year or much of it, we've unfortunately had to take the decision that the seminars will continue on Zoom for the rest of the year, although actually there's so much that's positive about it. I mean, it's great to have had so many people able to join this presentation, for example, but they will continue on Zoom till the end of the year. And our next seminar in the History of Collecting will take place on Zoom, of course, at 5:30 on Monday, the 24th of May, when Christile Attard-Trevisan, a PhD candidate at the Institute of English Studies in the School of Advanced Study at the University of London, will give a presentation on the Primo Costo inventory of Count Saverio Marchesi, and his dates are 1757 to 1833, mapping the print market in Malta and its European connections. So I just remains to me, Ellinoor, to thank you again for a really fascinating and very, very rich lecture. And on behalf of the Wallace Collection, thank you very much, everybody, for attending this seminar. And we hope to see you at future seminars and other online events held by the Wallace Collection. Good evening.